The closing of the Synod on the Family in Rome. The Papal Posse joins us once again from the Eternal City. What's been accomplished and what will it really settle? Robert Arroyo and Father Gerald Murray lay it all out. And later, the National Catholic Register's Edward Penton offers his final Synod report, and he discusses the saint that has been curiously absent throughout this meeting. And finally, Christians are leaving the Holy Land in alarming numbers. Father Peter Vasco, president of the Franciscan Foundation for the Holy Land, discusses his efforts to stop the Christian exodus. The World Over Live begins right now.
Now, from Washington, D.C., Raymond Arroyo.
A warm welcome to all of you joining us in the United States and the world over. Robert Arroyo, Father Gerald Murray, Edward Penton, and Father Peter Vasco are all straight ahead. In moments, we'll give you the most in-depth coverage of the Synod on the Family you'll find anywhere. If you'd like to comment on tonight's show, or if you have a question, I'll be live tweeting throughout. Find me on Twitter at Raymond Arroyo. Or you can email me at worldover@ewtn.com. Here's the brief news from the world over this week. The Vatican has vehemently and repeatedly denied a report this week that Pope Francis has a curable brain tumor. The response came after a Tuscan daily published a detailed story claiming a papal helicopter took a world-renowned oncologist to examine the Pope in Rome. The newspaper further quotes a hospital employee who claims that a dark spot was found on the Pope's brain. It is small, in the opinion of this hospital worker, not malignant, and does not require surgery. The Vatican on Tuesday and Wednesday condemned the report as seriously irresponsible and unfounded, and went out of their way to emphasize that the Pope is well. English language spokesman Father Tom Rosica.
As you can see from the Pope's activity today throughout the Synod, he is in very good health, working at an incredible speed, getting things done, and we are not concerned about that whatsoever.
The editor of the paper that published the story said he anticipated the Vatican denial and is standing by the report. For the first time in a decade, Canada has a new prime minister. In federal elections held on Monday, 43-year-old MP Justin Trudeau beat out Conservative Party Prime Minister Stephen Harper. He also gained a Liberal majority in Parliament. Trudeau, son of the legendary former Prime Minister Pierre Trudeau, took just under 40% of the popular vote in an election that saw Canada's highest voter turnout in over 20 years. Justin Trudeau is a Jesuit-trained Catholic from Quebec who is unabashedly pro-choice. As the Liberal leader in Parliament in 2014, he made headlines by refusing to allow pro-life party members a free vote on the question of abortion. Trudeau will take over as Prime Minister on November 4th. And Pope Francis this week pleaded for an end to the latest round of violence in the Holy Land. At his Angelus address on Sunday, he called for Palestinians and Israelis alike to reject hatred and work for peace. Clashes between the two sides have increased in the wake of a recent wave of stabbings by Palestinians against Israelis. Since the beginning of October, at least 7 Israelis and 44 Palestinians have been killed in the West Bank and Gaza. The Israeli government has since built new safety barriers and checkpoints in the West Bank. In a statement, the Patriarch of Jerusalem, Archbishop Papal, said, quote, "We must condemn this violence and avoid as much as possible the causes which lead other people to violence." He further condemned the government's separation policy, calling the security wall a disfigurement of the face of the Holy City. More on the Holy Land later in the show. And former Secretary of State Hillary Rodham Clinton arrived on Capitol Hill Thursday to testify as a star witness in the Republican-led investigation into the deadly 2012 attacks in Benghazi, Libya. In advance of her testimony, the Clinton campaign released a summary that said she is appearing before the committee to honor the memory of the 4 Americans killed in Benghazi. Once the hearing began, Clinton firmly defended her handling of the affair, saying she took responsibility for the attacks that killed Ambassador Chris Stevens and 3 others. She claims she implemented every security measure that was recommended in a review of the incident. And Wisconsin Congressman and former vice presidential candidate Paul Ryan announced he would run for Speaker of the House, but only with full support of the major Republican caucuses in the House of Representatives. The 45-year-old legislator said he hopes to unify what has become an increasingly divided body. On Thursday, the Conservative Freedom Caucus gave Ryan their support. The vote to elect the next House Speaker is scheduled for October 28th. And fallout from the Planned Parenthood fetal body parts scandal continues. On Monday, Texas banned the abortion giant from participating in the state's Medicaid program. The decision follows national controversy surrounding undercover videos in which the sale of fetal tissue is discussed and negotiated by Planned Parenthood employees. Governor Greg Abbott said in an interview with Fox News the videos uncovered several legal violations, including evidence that Planned Parenthood altered the abortion procedure in order to obtain fetal parts. And the nation's largest evangelical group has backed off from their unequivocal support of the death penalty. The National Association of Evangelicals, representing 10 million Christians and 40 denominations, approved a resolution stating that both those who support and those who oppose the death penalty can legitimately ground their beliefs in Christian ethics. NAE President Leith Anderson characterized the move in terms of evangelicals' larger advocacy for respect for life from the womb to the tomb. The decision does not reverse a 1973 resolution supporting the death penalty. The Pope, during his recent visit to Capitol Hill, called for an abolition of capital punishment. Overall, support for the death penalty has dropped some 20 points in the last 20 years, according to Pew Research. However, a majority of all Americans, as well as the religiously affiliated, still support it. And finally, an extremely rare 400-year-old Bible containing a rather unfortunate typo is up for auction. The Seventh Commandment in a 1631 edition of the so-called Sinner's Bible reads, "Thou shalt commit adultery." Approximately 1,000 copies made it into circulation before the spectacular omission of the word "not" was noticed. Anglican leaders were outraged at the time, and a furious King Charles I ordered them all burned. However, a few copies survived. The Bible is expected to fetch around $25,000. It's a good thing one of those didn't make it to the Synod on the Family. It might have added another week to the small group meetings. When we return, the final week of the Synod on the Family is done. What has been accomplished? And are the controversies settled? Robert Royal and Father Gerald Murray will join us from Rome in a moment. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Now to discuss the third and final week of the Synod on the Family, what has been accomplished and what it really means to you. I'm joined from Rome by the Papal Posse, Robert Royal, the editor-in-chief of thecatholicthing.org, and Father Gerald Murray of the Archdiocese of New York. Thank you both for being here. Now, before we delve into last week, the other day, these small groups, there were 13 of small groups meeting at this Synod, and they released their reports. What did these reports tell us about the support among the bishops for that Casper proposal, that penitential process that would allow divorced and remarried Catholics to return to the sacrament without an annulment? Robert Royal.
Well, Raymond, there are different ways of parsing what the 13 different groups did. In fact, we even disagree. We sat down the other day over lunch and tried to figure out how to sort them out, and you could nuance it one way or another. But basically, here's the way it works out, I think. You have about 3 or 4 of the 13 small language circles that in one way or another would like to affirm some path toward communion for the divorced and the remarried. But that's only 13 or 14 out of 3 or 4 out of 13. There probably is a group of about 4 or 5 who have said absolutely no, or you can see that they're leaning in that direction, but didn't pronounce in the actual report they submitted to the committee that's drafting the document. The biggest worry here might be the other 5 or so groups who talk about either devolving the authority to make decisions about this matter to a local level, either to a bishops' conference or to bishops themselves, or to move it to the Holy Father. So if that process continues, then we don't get closure. But for right now, inside the Synod, it seems to be universally acknowledged that the Casper proposal is not going to move forward.
Okay. At a press conference...
I would add to that, Raymond, that it was interesting to see... No, it was interesting to see that the English language groups, by and large, were against the Casper proposal, and one of the French groups, the one involving Cardinal Sarah, was clearly against it. So there is a kind of breakdown that goes the English and French-speaking worlds against it, Italian, Spanish, and German showing either favor or tolerance for the Casper proposal.
At a press conference Wednesday, German Cardinal Reinhard Marx, who has previously said that local churches should not be seen as a subsidiary of Rome and vowed to go their own way on certain hot-button issues, he had this to say about how this synod will end. Gentlemen, listen.
The Holy Father will make something with this text, so the synod is not at the end. The synod opens the way for the Holy Father to do what he wants with this discussions.
The synod is now going to end, but that will not be the end. Where do you see this continuing? Clearly, we have said from the start, the Pope will have the last word. But it seems there's a strategy being advanced here to keep these issues that perhaps lacked support alive. What do you think?
Well, Raymond, it's a bit hard. We're outside the room, and we don't know exactly what's going on inside. But one of the themes, of course, that has emerged over the last, in particular over the last week and a half, is that the possibilities that the Holy Father is going to have open to him, the Vatican has been emphasizing that a great deal. I think we've talked about that before on this program. And the worrisome thing about this is, if you believe that the Holy Father really does want to advance the Casper proposal, and you have those 3 or so small groups that want to affirm it, and maybe 4 or 5 that would like to move a decision on that to bishops' conferences or the Pope himself, that may just mean that we get after 2 years of working on this, we get some sort of commission or a special decision on the part of the Holy Father, which really could deliver us the Casper proposal, but not through the mechanism of the Synod itself. So if it goes on, it's one thing if what Cardinal Marx is talking about is that synodality, as the Holy Father said last Saturday when he was celebrating the 50 years of the modern synod. If what that means is we're going to listen and discuss among ourselves more broadly, more widely, that, of course, is something the Church ought to be doing anyway and has done in the past. Yeah. If it means that we're now going to have an absolutely open process that has no limit, then it's another matter.
Archbishop Mark Coleridge of Brisbane had this to say at Monday's press conference about the consensus at this synod.
I don't think we're ever going to get consensus on some of these hot-button issues. But was that ever a realistic possibility? I doubt it. And the one thing that's certain about next Sunday is that we won't have finished the task. This journey will continue.
Father Jerry, how will this journey continue? What form might it take? Bob just mentioned this special commission that might explore hot-button issues. Might this new Diecast Tree that the Pope announced today, this new Diecast Tree on the family, might that be the commission that some of these small groups desired and some of the bishops desired?
Well, it's not clear exactly what's going to happen today. The final report draft was handed to the Synod Fathers. It was not made public, and it's a confidential document, so we haven't seen it. And that will tell the tale, because in it, the Synod Writing Committee is basically giving to the fathers what they want them to approve. The fathers will have an opportunity tomorrow to both debate it on the floor and to submit written amendments. If this notion that the Synod is not going to continue, or is not going to rather reach a final decision on the so-called hot button issues, which, by the way, let me remind our listeners, we're talking about something that has been the constant practice of the Catholic Church since it was founded. Giving communion to people who are in an adulterous second marriage has never been the position of the Church. So if that decision is not reached by the Synod, and if the clear teaching of the Church and its discipline is not upheld, but rather is postponed and given into the hands of a commission, that would be a rather frustrating end, in my opinion, because the Synod Fathers have been looking at this material for now a year and a half, almost 2 years. It's quite clear. There is no theological support for this notion, and it would be worrisome. One of the things we're hearing is the Synod may talk about conscience in a new way, which would more or less be a backdoor way of saying the Catholic Church is going to leave it to people to decide what they want to do. Conscience is a profoundly important notion in the Church, but it does not equal do whatever you want. And that really, I hope, doesn't come out of this Synod.
Yeah, we heard certain archbishops, Archbishop Supich of Chicago, say that conscience is preeminent, or it should be. Before I launch into some of these specific ideas advanced this week by certain Synod Fathers, and where that leaves us, there has been a noticeable omission in all of these discussions, mainly children. Now, Father Murray, you wrote an amazing piece this week underscoring this absence of kids. What is the problem here, Father? Why not talk about children in the context of family?
Well, you know, the Synod really got its start with Cardinal Casper's report to the cardinals in Rome a year and a half ago, in which he highlighted this notion of communion for divorced and remarried. And I think that kind of hijacked the whole impetus of what the Synod's supposed to be about. Family is the strength of the Catholic Church and is the basis of society. I'm a parish priest. I have a wonderful parish in Manhattan. We have a big CCD program, many families coming. That's the life of the Church, and we should not be focusing simply on ancillary questions which are based sometimes on bad theology. You know, all this focus on difficulties and helping people in problems, that's all fine, but you can only get to that point if we first say, God has a plan. It's been revealed to us, Adam and Eve, Christ, sacrament of marriage. Family is the basis of how the Church progresses in society. That should have been highlighted. In fact, children really are absent subjects at this Synod, and it is a mistake, I think.
Yeah.
And one of the things that many of the Synod Fathers have talked about is that, unfortunately, because of the focus on these so-called hot-button issues, what the Synod then begins to look like is just a debate over certain points, when in fact there was an opportunity here to talk about supporting and actually developing inside the Church the means to support good, sound families. And Cardinal Napier from South Africa said the other day that if we really want a touchstone for how the Synod should proceed, we should look at that first, those good families, and say that's what we want and how do we get people to that. Instead, what we've got is, I think we will end up with a document that will not incorporate these departures, as Father says, from the classic understandings that exist in the Church. We don't know where the process will go after that, but it's become an internal process more than really a conversation, and it's ironic that this Synod was supposed to be opened up to conversation, and it's ended up being a debate over some points that certain people in the West, not even everyone in the West, seem to think are burning issues.
There's also been this constant emphasis, we've heard this week after week throughout the Synod, of changing or adapting language the Church uses to discuss and define certain situations. This is Archbishop Mark Coleridge of Brisbane again. Here he is at Monday's press conference. Now, he suggested that certain language is too broad, like the word adultery. Listen.
Just to say that every second marriage or second union, whatever you want to call it, is adulterous, is perhaps too sweeping. For instance, a second marriage that is enduring and stable and loving and where there are children who are cared for, is not the same as a couple skulking off to a hotel room for a wicked weekend.
Can that language change in the Church, Father Murray?
I really regret that the Archbishop said that. He's not, unfortunately, the first to say it. Cardinal Casper also said something similar more than a year ago. Let's get down to hard brass tacks here. Jesus Christ said if a man leaves his wife, divorces his wife and marries some another, he commits adultery. You can't dismiss that, get around it, say, well, if the circumstance of the adultery kind of imitate a marriage that's valid, well, we won't call it adultery. Now, let's get to another problem here, Raymond, which is language. Language is meant to convey clearly meaning and information. Jesus was quite clear. Marriage is one man, one woman for life. So if you leave your wife or you leave your husband, that's regrettable, but the Church can deal with that and say, look, don't enter an invalid second marriage. If you do enter an invalid second marriage, the message of the Church is clear. Stop the adultery. If you have children, you need to be responsible and raise them. Fine, live as brother and sister. There are many heroic couples doing that. God's grace is ample. We should not say that the Lord was too strict when he said adultery applies to all cases of people having a second wife or a second husband. For me, that's basic Catholicism.
Raymond, we've also seen inside the press briefings questions put several times to the presenters at those briefings. Well, you've had weeks and weeks and, almost a year and a half, more than a year and a half now, talking about language. Can you give us some examples of what new language we would be able to use about adulterous second marriages, as Father just said, or about issues like homosexuality as intrinsically disordered? After all this time, and after all these people meeting together in goodwill, trying to find some other way to present the solid teachings of the Church, no one has been able to offer a single example of a different kind of language because there isn't any. These terms that we've used are not offensive unless you choose to be offended by them. They express what Catholic moral teaching is. Of course, we're kind to human beings. We have to love other human beings no matter what circumstances they're in. But this is really a dodge. There is no language that is going to satisfy people who are going to want their own situations to be affirmed. And that's proven by the fact that no one up to this point has been able to offer an alternative for any of these allegedly offensive ways of speaking about things.
Yeah, I also thought that the Archbishop's examples there were a little unfortunate. I mean, to say that a stable union where people are married without an annulment is somehow more moral than the overnight tryst at the motel. Frankly, the overnight tryst at the motel, you can go get forgiveness and you're done. The adultery stops. In the other case, it continues, does it not?
Yes, in fact, that's one of the things that we warn people against, which is to develop a habit of sin, and that to try and convince yourself, since you feel comfortable in your sin or you find this new relationship agreeable, that somehow it's not displeasing to God. I think of the analogy to Alcoholics Anonymous. At AA, you announce yourself as saying, I'm an alcoholic. They don't flee from the language of truth. And I think, as a pastor, I don't go walk up to people and say, you're an adulterer, stop your behavior. But if people come in to talk to me about their problem with a second marriage, I say, look, if you want to get right with the Church, either see if there was a reason why your first marriage was null, and if there's not, live as brother and sister. Because what counts in the end? Do I please myself or do I please God? I think we all know the answer to that. Please God, then your life will be in order.
I want to share this with you. This is, again, Cardinal Reinhard Marx. He had this to say about church doctrine and truth on Wednesday. Listen to this closely.
The doctrine is the tradition of the Church. The doctrine of the Church is not a closed shop, but a living tradition. We don't change the truth, but we find the greater truth. We are not, the truth is owning us. We don't own the truth. The truth is a person we meet.
Your thoughts on this? How is truth a person we meet? Robert Royal.
Well, look, in one way, of course, Jesus himself says, I am the way, the truth, and the life, and we should take that literally. And if we're going to make advances in doctrine, it should be more deeply into those things that our Lord himself has told us. I was there in the room when he said that, and it just struck me that it's true that there are all sorts of levels of doctrine and different shadings and applications and whatnot, but the fact still stands that over 2,000 years of Catholic history, in which our tradition has been developed by some very holy and some very smart people in all sorts of different circumstances. No one has ever pointed to the complexity and richness of Catholic theology and said that that's some sort of justification to ignore our Lord's words about marriage and divorce. So, you know, it's true in an abstract theological sense, but it has almost no relevance to the things we're discussing.
This is like people at the Supreme Court of the United States saying we have a living constitution, which we constantly rewrite when we come across new pressure groups telling us what the liberal agenda is. The Constitution is written down, we know what it means. Well, Catholic doctrine is even much more certain because it comes from God. So this notion that, you know, truth will vary according to the situation, we're falling into basically the heresy of Gnosticism, where kind of the real meaning of Christianity is unknown until someone comes along and tells us. No, it's quite clear. The Church teaches, the teaching is known, now we have to live that teaching.
I want to take the wide view for the moment before we run out of time. Who, in your opinion, shaped this synod in the most preeminent way? Who are the breakout players here?
Well, in the first instance, it seems to me that the drafters of the working document gave the bishops who arrived here a very difficult task, because it's a very complicated, disjointed, not very inspiring text on a subject that really should have been something that would be uplifting and point a way toward being uplifting, not only for the Synod Fathers, but for people back home. So the writers of that document, the drafters of that document, had the greatest influence beyond compare. Inside the room this time around, clearly Cardinal Pell from Australia, who's the head of this new economic Diecast Tree here in the Vatican, has been a tremendous spokesman, along with the others who signed the letter that he prepared. He's been a tremendous spokesman, warning everyone and warning the Holy Father that there seem to be dangers lurking down the way. So I think that he's played a pivotal role in making sure that as much as you could get out of a bad document like this, which is to say, it couldn't realistically be very good or be very inspiring, but at least it's not going to have those profound departures from Catholicity. I mean, we were facing at one point with the very conservative Polish delegation and the very liberal German delegation that a person on one side or the other of the border could drive across the border and either be committing a profound sacrilege or being the recipient of a profound act of mercy, according to the Casper program or the devolution program. It's a mess, and it's probably the worst has been avoided, but this is not an ideal thing for the Church to present to the world as a way to help reinforce the family.
Father Jerry, who in your opinion?
Raymond, well, let me say, I think the methodology and the process, meaning the way the whole thing was structured, this evening here in Rome, the Synod Fathers received the document only in Italian. The draft of the final document was only given in Italian. They have tonight to read it, and then tomorrow to make comments both on the floor and in written form. And for me, that really is lacking. This synod has been in preparation for over a year. There are 5 language groups. Couldn't that document be produced in the language group so that people could read it? Because right now, I think many cardinals who don't know Italian, and they don't have an Italian translator with them, they don't know what that document says in the end. And I think that's really a fault. I would say that Bob's point is absolutely correct. Cardinal Pell, I would add Cardinal Sarah's had a great influence. A lot of behind-the-scenes things, of course, that we don't know about.
Right.
But from the public relations point of view, the message, I think, is quite clear. The defenders of Catholic tradition and teaching were not silent, and they came really to the forefront to say, we cannot change what is unchangeable.
Well, I would say one of the most important interjections in the midst of this synodal process was Pope Francis himself in another defining speech of his papacy. During the celebration of the 50th anniversary of the establishment of these synods, Pope Francis discussed the need to decentralize the Church, decentralize power. He said this, in a synodal church, as I have said, it is not advisable for the Pope to take the place of local bishops in the discernment of every issue which arises in their territory. In this sense, I am conscious of the need to promote a sound decentralization. He added that the church should be a synodal church, one that listens. What does that mean, this decentralization? And how does this square with his annulment reforms passed last year with no consultation at all, or earlier this year?
Well, let me jump in on that, Raymond, and say the Pope is right in a very real sense that the church cannot be micromanaged from Rome. Bishops in the nations and bishops in their dioceses are responsible. On the other hand, and I think the Pope realized it because precisely his actions also signal that we can just decentralize everything. Take the sexual abuse by clergy. When Rome was not actively supervising what was going on in many countries, disasters were happening. This Pope has established this commission for sexual abuse. He gave new rules. He established a tribunal so that bishops who are negligent in handling cases will be judged by this commission. You mentioned the annulment rules. Those were not circulated to national bishops' conferences for consultation before they were issued. So, you know, decentralization is good on some things, but, you know, the Catholic Church is one. The Pope confirms the brethren in the faith. And I think we're going to have to continue with that if we want to have a unity of approach and apostolate.
Robert Royal, in the same speech, Pope Francis also talked about a conversion of the papacy. He said, while reaffirming the urgent need to think about a conversion of the papacy, I willingly repeat the words of my predecessor, Pope John Paul II. As Bishop of Rome, I'm fully aware that Christ ardently desires the full and visible communion of all those communities in which, by virtue of God's faithfulness, His Spirit dwells. Now, John Paul II there was talking about Christian unity. What is Pope Francis getting at?
I have to say I don't know, Raymond. And as in that earlier quotation that you mentioned that Father commented on, I don't know who ever thought that Rome micromanaged everything in every diocese. So we're going to have to see what the Holy Father does with that. And you may recall that when John Paul II talked about trying to stimulate greater movement toward Christian unity, he invited others to help him rethink what he called the Petrine ministry, the ministry that St. Peter was given by our Lord to strengthen and to hold together his disciples. So even a converted papacy along the lines that that Francis is talking about is going to have to be some sort of sacrament of unity. The only way that I think we'll be able to understand what he means by that and means by a synodal church is as we see the way it develops. At this point, it seems a very general statement.
Yeah, no, it's an odd statement, a conversion of the papacy. I need to wrap here. What was accomplished in the final appraisal? I mean, we have what essentially is a collection of reflections on the family, a pamphlet for the Pope to consider. What does this do in your estimation? Father Gerald Murray, what was accomplished in these 3 weeks?
I think these 3 weeks have been a revelation that there is a crisis in the church and that there's a lack of unity as regards the sacramental discipline of the church. And I say that with regret. I thought the Casper proposal was going nowhere. I was distressed to see that it was proposed by some of the small language groups. I hope that it doesn't emerge in the final document. But, you know, in the Catholic Church, it's no surprise if you look at the history that there are some movements within the church to change church doctrine. This is disconcerting to people, and I think we hope and pray that nothing bad will come of it. But given the fact that there are bishops who are saying these things, it's good for the Catholic people to reaffirm their loyalty, because what St. John Paul II and Pope Benedict taught about the reception of communion by divorced and remarried people, that is Catholic truth and practice. It's not an opinion. It's not a doubtful question. So I regret that that continued to be on the table. On the positive side, I'll say this. We understand even better now with the toxic culture that surrounds us in the U.S. and elsewhere. If we don't strengthen family life, then we're really not doing our job as a church. I think that's what Pope Francis had as his intuition for the Synod, and I pray that the implementation of that will benefit Catholic families throughout the world.
Robert Royal, where do we go from here?
It's a positive thing that at least within the Synod process, we didn't have these horrible departures from Catholic teaching in the document that is going to be, we think, the document that's been produced. It's only been an hour or so here in Rome that the bishops have had that, and we'll have to see tomorrow and then the following day what that document actually contains. But it seems at this point that in that very limited way, the document has been corrected and will not propose things that are contrary to the faith.
Well,
however, in the longer run, as Father was saying, we now have this mentality that the Catholic Church is discussing things like communion for the divorced and remarried, is discussing things like what stance we have toward homosexuals, although that subject, which was a burning subject last time, seems to have dropped away this time around. I think it was just too much to try to deal with all those things in this one event. The difficulty is that it sends out a message to a lot of people. I hear this from priests, I hear this from laity, that they don't know anymore where is the church going. They're very confused about what the church stands for. That was already the case because we've had a number of decades of rather poor catechetics of our own people, and I think it's probably even worse. But I think Father is right that the positive side of this is many of the bishops in the Synod have talked about the importance of the family, not only to the future life of the church, but to the future life of society in this world. So we're at a crisis point. It's been recognized. Let's hope that the Holy Spirit leads us in the direction that we're called to go at this point in history.
Well, I said it last year. I said it during the papal visit. I said it as we started the coverage of this synod. All of this is just preamble. The Holy Father will have the last word. I think he means to do something and will do it in this year of mercy, which commences in December. We'll, of course, stay on top of this and continue watching. Robert Royal, Father Gerald Murray, thank you for joining us for these past 3 weeks, and, of course, for the great papal visits. Couldn't have done it without you all. Be sure to visit thecatholicthing.org for Bob and Father Jerry's updates, and I hope to see both you guys very soon. Safe travels. When we return, the saint missing from the Synod. And was this meeting rigged? We'll ask the National Catholic Register's Vatican correspondent, Edward Penton, when The World Over continues. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over. He reported on manipulation at the last Synod on the family. How did the final round go? Joining us via satellite from Rome, the Vatican correspondent for the National Catholic Register and author of the book, The Rigging of a Vatican Synod, Edward Penton. Edward, thanks for being with us. As a means of setting up my first question, this is Cardinal Wilfrid Napier, this week discussing last year's Synod. Listen.
There were certain individual items that were of concern at the last Synod, and one in particular was the presentation of the interim report as if it had come from the Synod, as if it was part of the Synod's deliberation. That document was already saying things which I know were only said in the hall by at the most two or three people, but it was presented as if they were the reflection of the Synod. Now, that certainly gives you the impression that the Synod is being pushed in a certain direction.
So, Edward Penton, was this Synod on the family rigged?
It's a bit early to say, Raymond. I mean, we're going to have to look back at this because there's things probably that have gone on which we haven't heard about from our side of things. But I think on the face of it, I think this Synod has gone much better. I think the letter of the 13 cardinals, as Cardinal Napier said at the press conference, did set things at ease a little bit, and I think there was a certain amount of reassurance there that the Pope gave that there wouldn't be a manipulation. So that allowed people to sort of concentrate on the work in hand rather than worrying about that. So that was a positive thing. But there are different aspects which have been of concern, which we can go into if you like.
Yeah. Well, tell me what are some of the areas? I mean, when you look at the group that actually drafted this final document, it's the same people that you describe in your book as inserting phrases and shaping that very controversial midterm report, Forte and Baldessari and others. What are the Synod Fathers telling you? What concerns are they sharing with you?
Well, as that letter showed, that this is the big concern, that the drafting committee of the final report is made up of probably 7 out of 10 of them have what people would say don't have a very robust understanding of the Church's teaching on marriage and the family. So people are saying, well, the deck is obviously, it's a stacked deck there in that case. But it's still early to say because we're going to have to wait and see what the final report says. But just hearing what's been happening tonight, Synod Father came out of the Synod Hall and said, well, we've been sent home to look at the draft report, but it's only in Italian, and it's a big, thick document. It's 100 paragraphs of what they've been discussing, and it's only in Italian. So, not everybody speaks Italian, of course, in the Synod Hall, and so they've got just a few hours, really. They probably spend the night reading it, trying to work out what it all means. And then they've got to table amendments tomorrow if they want anything changed. And then on Saturday morning, they'll get the document read to them through an interpreter. It still won't be translated, but the amendments will have been incorporated.
Wow.
So, the argument is if they're going to have a translated document, it should really have been the draft document so that they can know exactly what they're reading, rather than on Saturday when it's time to vote on it in the afternoon.
Edward, on John Paul II's feast day, which this is, St. John Paul, one of the Polish archbishops said he was struck that so many of the teachings of John Paul II on the family were foreign to the other Synod Fathers. Why do you think that is? Why was this icon of the family and a pope that looms so large, why was he largely absent from this Synod, in your opinion?
It's a very good question. I mean, I think somebody said, well, a lot of the Synod Fathers probably don't know many of the documents anyway, not only John Paul II, but they probably haven't read a whole lot of the sort of encyclicals of the past 30, 40 years. So, there is that. But I think that also this synod has been, I mean, at the last synod certainly there was a certain marginalisation of John Paul II, John Paul, the Pope of the family, of course, as people called him, which was very ironic. But we don't really know why that is. I think it's just a general ignorance, and that's what I've been hearing too. That's been the case among most of them.
Tell me about this new dicastery. The Pope came out this morning. He announced that he was founding a new dicastery that would be made up of some existing councils, the Pontifical Council on the Family, the Pontifical Council on the Laity, the Academy for Life. He was consolidating them into one thing. How is this being received by the Synod Fathers? And might this be the much discussed commission that some of these small groups argued should be tasked with figuring out whether communion should be extended to the divorced and remarried?
That's a good question, Raymond. It's too early to say, of course, but I think there is this attempt by the Pope to obviously bring these things together to try and make it a more efficient and a more answerable to the people that they're supposed to be serving. So I think the general aim is good. This, of course, is a fruit of the C9, the group of 9 cardinals who've been discussing curial reform. It's been rumoured for some time, so it doesn't come as a great surprise. I think the timing is quite a surprise. We're not quite sure why the Pope chose to, announce this in the middle of the synod or coming to the end of it, but I'm sure he has a good reason, and I think we just have to wait and see how this pans out. But I think there'll be similar things like this too, a certain consolidation of dicasteries as well.
Edward, I only have another minute here. We heard a cardinal from Bombay today say there are no answers in this final document, only questions. You had Archbishop Roberto Gonzalez say that the final document, will leave the door open to the Holy Father. Given that speech that we heard on Saturday, which I was discussing earlier with my papal posse, talking about the Pope's office being the guarantor of unity, what do you expect he will do? An apostolic exhortation? Is that what you expect?
I think that could be the case, but whether that comes soon, we don't know. I mean, usually these documents take 6 months or longer. And some people think, well, maybe he'll wait until the Year of Mercy is completed and then issue it at the end of that, so in a year's time. But I think if he does delay it, I think it shows that the Pope wants all these issues discussed more. He might just make this whole Year of Mercy a year in which to discuss these issues more at the diocesan level. I think that's part of the plan with this Year of Mercy. I think it is to put it out to the diocese and to regional bishops' conferences to discuss in greater detail. So I think that's probably the way he'll go. but I can't see this final report staying out of the public eye. I think somehow we're going to see it, although we still don't know for sure if the Pope does want it published. So we'll see. Yeah.
Oh, well, if so, this synod will have ended with a whimper rather than a bang. The Rigging of the Vatican Synod, the e-book by Edward Penton, is available online at ignatius.com and amazon.com, and all his reports are at the National Catholic Register. Edward, thanks for being there. When we return, why are Christians in the Holy Land leaving? Father Peter Vasco, president of the Franciscan Foundation for the Holy Land, shares the latest. Stay right there.
Now, once again, Raymond Arroyo.
Welcome back to The World Over Live. My next guest has been living in Jerusalem for 30 years. He's currently the president of the Franciscan Foundation for the Holy Land. I sat down with him here in D.C. to discuss the challenges facing Christians, the persecution in the region, and what he's doing to help these beleaguered people. Here's my interview with Father Peter Vasco. Father Vasco, thanks for being here. Given the rise of ISIS, and we've seen it over the last few years, it has highlighted the Christian persecution in Iraq, in Syria. What impact has that had on the Christians in the Holy Land?
It really hasn't had a direct impact as such, because the Christians are in the state of Israel and the West Bank controlled by Israel. So in a way, they've been protected. There are perhaps we've heard stories where perhaps there's some infiltration of some agents of ISIS who would be coming in. But the Christians obviously are aghast of what is happening there to their fellow brothers and sisters in Christ, the executions, but they have not been affected, by that in a sense, because they're protected. They're in a safe environment.
According to some of the statistics, though, the Christians are leaving. I mean, there's only about 150 to 160,000 Christians, that's 2%, living in the Holy Land.
Right.
What impact will that have over the long term, and how are you working to maintain this population?
Well, people need motivations and incentives to stay in the Holy Land, to remain in the Holy Land, the Christians. Yes, they're leaving, but of the last, we had a study made the last 10 years, the exodus is slowing down a bit right now. Okay.
And to what do you attribute that?
That's been attributed to the fact that they're being given opportunities. More and more organizations, such, for example, the Franciscan Foundation for the Holy Land, is offering them free college scholarships, a free college education. All of these students who apply and receive a four-year college education, upon graduation, they become professional people, pharmacists, physicians, engineers, accountants, and they're staying. So this has been, with other organizations, been the real solution of keeping the Christians there, because they have a motivation to stay now. They're not being dumped into the sea and saying goodbye and good luck. They're being given opportunities, and that is what's keeping the Christians there.
Patriarch Fawad Thwal recently said these are the main causes of suffering to the Christian community. He said the confiscation and occupation of the lands, the Israeli wall, travel restrictions and checkpoints, and religious fanaticism and radicalism being the worst. What can the Franciscans and the Franciscan Foundation do to stem or stop any of those motivators?
Well, the problem is that the Franciscans, as you know, have been there for 800 years.
Right.
We've always been mediators, etc. If you remember back about 10 years ago when the siege of the Church of Nativity, where there were 200 some odd Palestinian so-called militants inside the church, and the Franciscans gave them sanctuary. We've always become mediators between the two forces. We've done it on several occasions with the Israeli government and the Palestinian Authority. A lot of those negotiations are secret, are very quiet. But this is the only way that I think that we can't solve the political problem as such. That's not our part. Our part is to play as mediators, as people of goodwill, to bring other people of goodwill, to show both sides of the story, to see if something can be done to enact more peaceful resolutions on all these different issues. We can't control the settlement situation. We can't really control the checkpoints. Those are basic sufferings that Patriarch Sabara said so correctly. But we have to give solace, we have to give hope, we have to continue to help people through humanitarian areas, to give them some sort of a hope for the future, and that's what we're trying to do as Franciscans.
Now, you all have faced some radicalism yourselves, have been subject to it. I want to start with St. Charbel's Maronite Monastery, which isn't yours, but near Bethlehem, it was the target of an arson not long ago, last year.
Yes, I heard that, and also, as you know, the multiplication of loaves and fishes.
Church of the Multiplication.
The problem is, if you look at in the past when there were incidents of this in Israel, we always had a problem trying to find the people responsible for these crimes. But in this particular incident, at least the one in Topka, they did find 2 or 3 ultra-Orthodox religious individuals who did commit the crime. But it's something that, you know, it's isolated in many ways. It's sad, but we continue to have to be open and don't necessarily just say, well, the Jewish people are our enemies. No. I would say Israel, we're trying to work with everybody, both with people of the Jewish faith, of the Muslim faith, and that's what Christianity is all about, always trying to unify.
And build bridges.
Yeah, and there's, you know, the other thing is that there's no basic trust between the Israelis and the Muslims. That has been going on since 1947. The problem is that when you continue with this mentality, how do you bring about peace? I don't think there'll ever be peace. I said many times in the Senate, I think there'll be a semblance of peace, but we need the goodwill of people, of peacemakers, to mediate that peace.
How long have you been in the Holy Land?
30 years. Long time.
Okay. Looking back, have things gotten better? Have you advanced that ball, the cause of peace, bringing these warring factions? I always saw the Franciscans, having visited there and watched this situation for a long time. You all really stand between these two warring sides, and if peace is possible, it's going to be facilitated in some way through that joiner, which is the Franciscans and the Christian population. Is it better or worse than it was 30 years ago?
I think it's about the same. I don't think it's. I think it's the same situation when I saw in the beginning, and it's gotten worse. Then it goes back to the status quo. The problem is that you're dealing with political situations, political ideology, and try to sit down with Muslims and talk about having peace when, for example, their homes are being confiscated or their lands are being confiscated, or when you have the settlers killing Arabs in the West Bank. Those things, it's very difficult to talk to both sides like this, but we try. We continue to. We don't say, "Oh, it's finished now." That the end of the end of the negotiations, but it's always ongoing. Francis of Assisi, as you know, was a mediator, and all we can do is one thing at a time. But I just want to mention something. When you think about the violence in general over there, in the Middle East, and even perhaps in Israel from time to time. I think in general, there are 2 basic risks. The one risk is you hear many people saying, "Oh well, the Middle East is a quagmire. We really shouldn't get involved with it." Then you hear people say, "Because of our own economic crisis, we really can't help these people." That's indifference. That's a risk that people are doing all the time. The other one, where people are not really talking to each other, are not trusting each other. We have to take steps. We have to get negotiations on the level. And the other risk is diametrically opposed: a call to arms. This country wants to destroy us. we have to destroy that country. So those are two basic risks that surround this whole problem we hear about the violence in the Holy Land. And how is it solved? It's going to be solved by negotiation. It's going to be solved by people of goodwill. And that's what the Franciscans are attempting to do in this instant.
Final question. Your foundation does so much, particularly in the field of education.
Yes.
And housing. Tell people a little bit about that mission and where it stands now.
Well, we've given over 375 college scholarships, free college education, to Christian students who are economically marginalized, but have at least a B average in high school. 80% of these young people that graduate become, as I said earlier, pharmacists, dentists, accountants, physicians, and these are the people who are going to leave the Holy Land. And because of the help and the contributions and donations from the American Catholics, especially talking about it on your various shows, we have been very successful, thank God, in maintaining and providing those motivations for them to remain in the Holy Land. So we're very happy.
Well, thank you for being here and for all
Thanks
you
so
do.
much, Raymond.
That's all the time we have for now. Until next week, the show continues on Facebook and Twitter. Like me on Facebook, follow me on Twitter. The links are at RaymondArroyo.com, and while there, you can sign up for my free e-blast. Don't miss next week's show. Until then, we'll be scouting the world over for all that is seen and unseen. On behalf of the staff and crew of EWTN News, thanks for watching. I'm Raymond Arroyo from Washington, D.C. Bye now.